My name is Sophia, and I need to tell you something I've carried in silence for years. Sometimes life hides the deepest betrayals behind familiar faces, and mine came from within my own family. From the outside, people would have thought I was lucky, growing up with a wealthy uncle who owned one of the largest ranches in Texas. But luck has a way of wearing disguises. What looked like privilege was, in truth, a prison of endless work, unspoken debts, and a man whose greed consumed every corner of his heart. For as long as I can remember, my uncle treated me less like family and more like a tool to expand his empire. He used my hands to mend fences, tend to cattle, and restore barns, while he used his wealth to buy respect in town. No matter how hard I worked, he made sure I felt small, insignificant, and indebted to him. And I accepted it because I thought I had no choice. But life has a cruel sense of irony, and sometimes the very chains used to hold you down become the keys to freedom. The day my uncle's signature, that golden emblem of power and ownership, slipped into my hands was the day everything began to change. A piece of paper turned the ranch, his pride and fortress, into mine. Yet with it came a storm I never saw coming. Secrets buried beneath the soil, alliances built on lies, and choices that would force me to confront not only my uncle's darkness, but my own courage. This is not a story about money. It is a story about survival, betrayal, and the shocking truth of what happens when the one who underestimated you the most suddenly realizes you hold everything he ever wanted. Before I take you into the heart of my story, I want you to imagine something. Imagine working your entire youth and adulthood, pouring sweat, tears, and years into land that never truly belonged to you. Imagine building barns with your bare hands, riding across fields before dawn, hearing the cattle stir as the sun crept over the horizon, only to be reminded, again and again, that none of it was yours. That was my reality, and every day felt like a reminder of where I stood in my uncle's eyes, useful but disposable. He was a man obsessed with power. Not just the power of money, but the power of control. He controlled the workers, the neighbors, the whispers in town, and of course, he controlled me. He knew I had nowhere else to go, so he chained me with invisible obligations, making sure that even gratitude felt like servitude. But stories don't stay frozen forever. One unexpected twist changed everything, and the balance of power shifted in a way I never believed possible. When the ranch deed landed in my hands, it didn't just mark ownership, it cracked open a vault of hidden truths. And what I found inside those truths was darker, more dangerous, and more liberating than anything I had ever imagined. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to rise from the shadows of someone else's greed and finally stand in the light of your own strength, stay with me. Because what I'm about to reveal is not only my story, it's a journey of discovering the cost of freedom and the courage to claim it. Before we go deeper, make sure you subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss the twists and revelations that are about to unfold. I still remember the first time I set foot on my uncle's ranch. I was only 9 years old, clutching my mother's hand, my shoes sinking into the dry Texas dirt as I stared at the endless horizon. My mother had whispered to me that this would be a new beginning, but I quickly realized it was the beginning of something far different than she imagined. My uncle, tall and broad-shouldered, stood on the porch with his sharp eyes scanning me as if I were livestock being appraised. His smile was thin, forced, and already I could sense the weight of his judgment. That was the day I unknowingly stepped into a life that would demand everything from me. The ranch was massive, sprawling across acres that seemed to have no end. To outsiders, it was a symbol of wealth, tradition, and power. But to me, it was a machine, and I was one of its gears. The barns smelled of hay and sweat, the fields burned with heat, and the cattle roamed like silent witnesses to my exhaustion. I learned quickly that children on my uncle's land didn't get to be children for long. While others my age went to summer camps or played after school, I was mending fences, hauling water, and rising before the sun to keep pace with his endless demands. At first, I believed my hard work would earn me his approval, maybe even his affection. I thought if I showed him how loyal and capable I was, he might treat me like family rather than a farmhand. But every time I tried, he found a way to remind me of my place. "Don't think this makes you special, Sophia," he'd mutter while inspecting my work. "You're lucky I keep you here." His words cut deeper than the blisters on my hands, and eventually I stopped hoping for kindness. Yet even in that relentless environment, I discovered small pieces of solace. The horses became my refuge, their steady breaths and warm bodies grounding me when I felt invisible. I would sneak moments in the stables, brushing their coats, whispering secrets into their ears as if they were the only beings capable of understanding me. Those animals saw me without judgment, without expectations. With them, I wasn't just the orphan niece or the unpaid worker, I was simply Sophia. The land itself, though unforgiving, also gave me strength. Watching the sun dip behind the hills reminded me that even the hardest days came to an end. My uncle's greed was not limited to money. He wanted control, admiration, and submission. He dictated everything, what I wore, how I spoke, even when I could sit down to rest. When neighbors visited, he paraded me around as if I were proof of his generosity, always boasting about how he took me in. Behind closed doors, though, he never let me forget that he believed I owed him everything. Gratitude became a weapon he used to silence me, and I swallowed my anger because survival left me no other choice. The workers on the ranch weren't blind to what was happening. Some pitied me, offering small acts of kindness, like slipping me an extra biscuit at dinner or covering for me when I was too exhausted to finish a chore. Others looked the other way, too afraid of my uncle's wrath to interfere. He had a way of making men twice his size bow their heads, and I often wondered how much of his power came from money and how much from sheer intimidation. To a child like me, he seemed invincible. Years passed in that rhythm of labor and silence. My body grew strong from the constant work, but inside I carried scars no one could see. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, dreaming of escape, yet unsure where I would go if I ever left. I had no inheritance, no safety net, and no family beyond him. That was his greatest weapon, my dependence. He built walls around me without bricks or barbed wire, yet they kept me just as trapped. Still, there was a fire inside me he could never extinguish. Every insult he threw, every order barked, every smirk of superiority only fueled a quiet determination I kept hidden. I promised myself that one day, somehow, I would no longer bend to his will. I didn't know when or how, but I carried that promise like a secret shield. It was the only thing that kept me from breaking completely under his control. Then came the first sign that the life I had known for so long was about to shift. It was subtle, too subtle for me to recognize at first. My uncle, usually so commanding and sharp, began to show cracks. He grew irritable over small mistakes, snapping at workers for errors he might once have ignored. He started keeping papers locked away in his study, muttering under his breath when he thought no one was listening. The ranch, once a fortress of his authority, began to feel unsteady. And though I couldn't yet see where this would lead, something deep inside me stirred with a mix of fear and anticipation, as if the land itself was whispering that change was on the horizon. The changes in my uncle were gradual at first, almost imperceptible, like the slow erosion of stone under relentless wind. He had always been stern, but now there was something different, an unease lurking behind his sharp commands. I noticed it one morning when he stumbled while dismounting his horse, cursing under his breath as if the earth itself had betrayed him. He brushed it off, waving me away when I asked if he was all right, but his face was pale and his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. That moment planted a seed of suspicion inside me. My uncle, the man who seemed untouchable, was not as invincible as I had once believed. With his sudden fragility came new burdens for me. Tasks that were once shared among the men became mine alone. He demanded I oversee the workers, keep the books, and ride the boundaries of the property to ensure everything was in order. At first, I resented the extra weight, but soon I realized it gave me something more valuable than I had ever been allowed before: authority. For the first time, people looked to me for answers instead of to him. Their eyes carried respect, even trust, and it awakened a strength I hadn't known was waiting within me. Still, the ranch was no gentler simply because my role had shifted. Long days blurred into longer nights, and I often collapsed into bed with my body aching. Yet, As tired as I was, there was an odd sense of satisfaction in knowing I could handle it. I began to see the ranch differently, not just as his empire, but as something I could manage, something that could one day be mine. Though the thought was dangerous even to entertain, I buried it deep, afraid he might see it in my eyes. Rumors started drifting through town about my uncle's health. People whispered at the general store, lowering their voices when I entered. "He's not the man he used to be," I overheard one woman say. "Something's bound to change out there." Gossip traveled fast, and soon relatives I hadn't spoken to in years began reappearing, calling the ranch as if to re-establish old bonds. They didn't fool me. They smelled weakness in him, and weakness meant opportunity. I knew the moment they sensed blood in the water, they would circle like vultures. My uncle, ever perceptive, seemed to feel the same. He grew paranoid, locking his office door and snapping at anyone who lingered too close. Papers were stacked high on his desk, and I often caught glimpses of deeds, bank records, and legal letters as I passed by. He never explained what they were, and I never dared to ask. But each document he guarded so fiercely only fueled my curiosity. What was he hiding? And why now, after years of flaunting his wealth openly, was he suddenly so secretive? The tension between us deepened. His tone became sharper, his temper quicker. One evening, as I returned from the pastures, he cornered me in the kitchen. "Don't think you're running this place," he snapped, his eyes narrowing. "This ranch is mine. It will always be mine." His words were like barbed wire, cutting into my skin. I hadn't said anything to suggest otherwise, but maybe my growing confidence had betrayed me. For the first time, I saw fear in his anger, fear that I might one day stand where he stood. And yet, despite his outbursts, there were nights when I caught him sitting alone on the porch, staring into the distance with a look I had never seen before. It wasn't pride or arrogance or control. It was something softer, regret perhaps, or even loneliness. For a fleeting second, I almost felt pity for him. But pity quickly faded when I remembered the years he had stolen from me, the chains he had wrapped around my life. Whatever haunted him was his burden, not mine. The more his grip weakened, the more I began to dream. I imagined what it would be like to own the ranch, to breathe without his shadow pressing against my back. I pictured the barns painted new, the workers treated with respect, the land flourishing under care instead of greed. It was a dangerous fantasy, but it kept me alive through the long hours. Deep down, I knew my uncle's reign was cracking, and I couldn't help but wonder who would hold the pieces when it all finally fell apart. Then one evening, as I was closing the barn, I found a letter slipped beneath the door. It was addressed not to me, but to my uncle, though curiosity burned through me the second I saw it. The handwriting was hurried, almost desperate, and though I didn't open it, I could feel the weight of its contents pressing against the envelope. I tucked it back where I found it, but the mystery gnawed at me all night. What secrets was my uncle hiding in those letters? And how much longer would he be able to keep them from me before the truth came crashing into both our lives? The letter I had stumbled upon refused to leave my thoughts. Even though I never opened it, the image of that sealed envelope burned in my memory like a brand. Every time my uncle shut himself away in his office, I couldn't help but imagine stacks of similar letters piled high on his desk, each one carrying secrets I wasn't meant to know. It felt like the walls of the ranch were whispering to me, urging me to uncover what had been buried for so long. My uncle wasn't just growing weaker, he was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what. Days later, I noticed him hunched over the kitchen table, a whiskey glass trembling in his hand. Papers were spread in front of him, and though he scrambled to gather them when I entered, I caught sight of numbers, columns and figures that didn't add up. The ranch was supposed to be thriving, yet the documents told a different story. Debts, overdue payments, mortgages. My uncle, the man who had boasted endlessly about his wealth, was drowning. It was a revelation that rattled me to my core. All those years of servitude, all those years of being told I owed him, yet he had been the one bleeding the ranch dry. I confronted him that evening, though cautiously. "Are we in trouble?" I asked, my voice low. His eyes snapped to mine, filled with fury. "Mind your place, Sophia," he barked. "This is my business, not yours." But the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. He was cornered, and he knew I had glimpsed the cracks in his empire. That night, as I lay awake, I realized something important. Power was no longer his to wield freely. Knowledge had shifted the balance, even if only slightly, and I intended to use it. Soon after, I began paying closer attention to conversations between the workers. At first, they spoke in hushed tones when I approached, but slowly, they started trusting me. I learned that suppliers had been withholding shipments because my uncle owed them money. Repairs were left unfinished because bills hadn't been paid. And worse, rumors spread that land developers had been sniffing around, eager to snatch up pieces of the ranch if my uncle failed to hold it together. To the men, it was gossip. To me, it was proof. The foundation of his power was crumbling beneath his boots. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves in unexpected moments. One afternoon, while delivering tools to the old storage shed, I discovered a locked trunk buried beneath tarps and broken equipment. It was heavy, iron-bound, and unlike anything I'd ever seen on the ranch. Curiosity gnawed at me, but without a key, it remained sealed. I left it untouched, though my mind raced with possibilities. What would a man like my uncle guard so fiercely? The trunk became a ghost in my thoughts, a silent challenge daring me to uncover its contents. The tension between us grew unbearable. My uncle snapped at me for the smallest mistakes, his paranoia bleeding into every corner of the ranch. "You think you know something," he hissed one night after catching me near his office, "but you don't know a damn thing." His words dripped with venom, but I saw the fear behind them. He was slipping, and he knew it. For the first time, I realized he feared me, not for what I had done, but for what I might discover. That realization was both terrifying and liberating. One evening, while tending to the horses, I overheard two workers speaking in hushed voices near the barn doors. "He's signing something over," one said. "He doesn't want her to know." My heart pounded as I pressed closer, straining to hear. They didn't say more, but it was enough to set my thoughts spiraling. Signing something over? To whom? And why keep it from me? That night, I resolved to watch him more carefully, no matter the risk. If he was planning to take something from me or from the ranch, I needed to know before it was too late. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Late one night, I passed his office and found the door ajar. Inside, the desk was cluttered with papers, a lamp casting golden light across them. My breath caught as I stepped closer, my hands trembling. There, among deeds and contracts, was a document stamped with the seal of a law office in town. My uncle must have heard my footsteps because he slammed the papers shut before I could read them fully, his face flushed red with rage. "Get out!" he roared, his voice cracking. "You don't belong in here." But in that moment, I knew. I had been right. He was hiding something monumental. What unsettled me most was not his anger, but the desperation in his eyes. This was no longer about pride or control. It was survival. He was fighting to keep his empire intact, and for the first time, I wondered how far he might go to protect it. Would he betray even me, the one who had given him years of loyalty and labor? The thought chilled me, but it also ignited a fire. I couldn't stand by any longer. If I wanted answers, I would have to dig deeper, even if it meant tearing open the darkest corners of his world. And so, as the nights grew longer and his temper shorter, I prepared myself for what was coming. I didn't know yet what lay inside the trunk, the letters, or the contracts he hid, but I knew this much. My uncle's empire was rotting from within, and when it finally collapsed, I would be standing at the heart of the storm. The storm finally broke one evening when I found my uncle slumped over at the dining room table, a half-empty bottle of bourbon by his side, and papers scattered like fallen leaves. His usual sharpness was gone, replaced by a haggard look that made him seem years older. I hesitated at the doorway, torn between concern and the old instinct to stay invisible. But when he raised his head and met my eyes, I saw something unexpected. Defeat. "It's all slipping away, Sophia," he muttered, his voice rough. "Everything I built." It was the first time he had ever admitted weakness, and though his words sent a shiver down my spine, they also confirmed what I had long suspected. His empire was crumbling. The ranch that had seemed indestructible was hanging by a thread. I pieced together what I could from glimpses of contracts and the whispers among workers. He had taken loans against the land, mortgaged parts of the property, and used money he didn't have to maintain the illusion of power. The greedy man who had always flaunted wealth was drowning in debt, desperate to keep appearances intact. Worse still, I learned that developers were waiting in the wings, eager to turn the wide-open pastures into commercial projects. The very soil I had bled and sweated for was being measured for profit, and it filled me with a rage I couldn't contain. When I confronted him, the fragile mask he wore cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, slamming my hands against the table. He glared at me, his face flushed, but his silence was louder than any excuse. Finally, he spat out, "Because it's not your concern. This ranch is mine to lose, not yours." His words struck me like a whip, but instead of cowering, I stood taller. "You've made it my concern," I shot back. "You've made it my entire life." For the first time, he didn't have a retort. He only stared at me, and in his eyes, I saw the realization that I was no longer the obedient girl he had shaped. The days that followed were heavy with tension. He locked himself in his office more often, and I could hear the scratch of his pen long into the night. I began to notice visits from men I didn't recognize, lawyers, bankers, strangers in suits whose polished shoes looked out of place against the dusty floors of the ranch. They came and went quickly, never meeting my gaze, but their presence confirmed the truth. My uncle was making desperate moves to salvage what little control he had left, and each time the front door closed behind them, I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing harder on my chest. Meanwhile, the workers grew restless. They noticed the changes too. Fewer supplies, delayed wages, whispers of layoffs. Some approached me directly, asking if the ranch was doomed. I wanted to reassure them, but I couldn't lie. Instead, I told them the truth, that things were changing, and I didn't yet know how. Their trust in me deepened, and I realized something powerful. While my uncle was losing control, I was quietly gaining it. People looked to me not just for answers, but for hope. It was a dangerous responsibility, but it gave me strength to push forward. The trunk in the storage shed haunted me. Every night I thought about it, wondering if it held the final piece of the puzzle. Finally, one evening, I couldn't resist any longer. I searched the house for keys, rifling through drawers and cabinets while my uncle was out riding. In his study, tucked behind a stack of ledgers, I found a small brass key that seemed too old and too ornate for anything else in the house. My heart pounded as I clutched it in my hand, knowing that if I was wrong, I'd be caught. But if I was right, the truth would finally be mine. With trembling hands, I returned to the shed, the key burning hot in my palm. The trunk loomed before me, silent and heavy. I knelt, slid the key into the lock, and turned. A sharp click echoed in the empty shed, and the lid creaked open. Inside were bundles of papers tied with string, yellowed with age. At first glance, they looked like ordinary records, land deeds, bank statements, but as I pulled them out, my breath caught. Hidden among the documents were letters from lawyers, receipts from loan sharks, and even contracts with developers who promised him large sums of money if he sold off parcels of the land. My stomach twisted. He hadn't just been careless. He had been reckless, gambling away the ranch piece by piece while I worked to hold it together. One letter stood out. It was a draft of a new deed, one that shifted ownership of a significant portion of the ranch to a faceless corporation. The thought of strangers laying claim to the land I had poured my life into made my blood boil. But then, tucked in the back of the trunk, I found something even more startling. A sealed envelope with my name written on it. My hands shook as I held it, my heart hammering in my chest. He had written something to me, something he had never intended to show me while alive. I didn't open the letter right away. Instead, I carried it back to my room, clutching it as though it were both a weapon and a lifeline. For hours I stared at it, my mind spinning with possibilities. Was it a confession? A will? A warning? The man who had held me captive in obligation for so many years had finally left me a message, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what it might say. But deep inside, I knew I couldn't hide from it forever. That night, as the wind howled outside and the ranch creaked under its own weight, I slid my finger under the envelope's seal and broke it open. The paper inside was brief, only a few lines, But those lines carried the weight of a lifetime. And as I read them, my world shifted in ways I could never have prepared for. The letter trembled in my hands as I unfolded it, the paper fragile, the ink smudged in places as though it had been written in haste. My uncle's handwriting was jagged and uneven, nothing like the firm, commanding scrawl he used for contracts and orders. The first line stopped me cold. "Sophia, if you're reading this, then I've already lost more than I can recover." My chest tightened as I continued. He admitted what I'd only guessed, that the debts were too heavy, the deals too dangerous, and the ranch was slipping beyond his grasp. But then, in a twist I never expected, he wrote, "This land belongs with you." It always should have. I read the letter over and over, unable to believe the words. For years, he had treated me as a servant, a burden, a shadow in his empire, and now he was claiming I had been the rightful heir all along. Confusion and anger warred within me. Why keep me in chains if he knew one day this place would be mine? Why crush me under the weight of his greed only to hand me everything at the edge of his ruin? It felt like both a gift and a cruel joke. The next morning, I confronted him with the letter in my hand. His face went pale the moment he saw it, his eyes darting to the floor as if he had been caught naked. "Where did you find that?" he demanded, his voice cracking. I held his gaze, steady and unflinching. "In the trunk. You wrote it to me, Uncle. You said the ranch should be mine." For the first time in my life, he looked small, stripped of his arrogance. He slumped into a chair, rubbing his temples, and whispered, "You weren't supposed to see that yet." His confession poured out like water through broken glass. He admitted that he had always intended to leave me the ranch, but pride and greed had kept him from telling me. He had wanted me to suffer, to earn every inch of the land through sweat and pain, so that when it was finally mine, I would never take it for granted. His words were meant to sound like justification, but to me, they were poison. "You could have given me a life," I said, my voice shaking. "Instead, you gave me chains." He didn't argue. He only stared at me with tired eyes that no longer held the power to command. The ranch was mine, legally, once the papers he had signed were filed. He admitted he had already drafted the deed, placing my name on it. The letter had been his way of explaining what he never had the courage to say aloud. I felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders, not just the ownership of land, but the years of pain that came with it. It wasn't victory, it was survival wrapped in barbed wire. The man who had built his empire on my back was now handing it over, not out of love, but because he had no choice left. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I walked the ranch that evening, watching the sunset bleed across the fields. Every fence post, every barn, every pasture carried the imprint of my labor. It was mine not because he gave it to me, but because I had already carved myself into its soil. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future here, one not ruled by his shadow, but guided by my own choices. A future where the workers were respected, the land was cared for, and the ranch became a place of life rather than greed. But my uncle wasn't ready to let go completely. Days later, he tried one final act of control. I found him in the office with another lawyer, attempting to rewrite the deed, to claw back a portion of the land for himself. Rage surged through me, sharper than any pain he had ever caused. I stepped into the room and slammed the letter down on the desk. "It's over," I said, my voice steady. "You can't take back what you've already signed." The lawyer, caught between us, looked uneasy, but confirmed the truth. The deed in my name was binding. My uncle's empire had slipped through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do. The look he gave me then was something I'll never forget. It wasn't anger or even hatred. It was recognition. For the first time, he saw me not as the girl he had bent to his will, but as the woman who had outlasted him. His shoulders sagged, and the fight drained out of him. Without another word, he dismissed the lawyer and left the room, his footsteps echoing through the halls like the fading roar of a storm. In that silence, I felt the power shift completely. The ranch, my life, my freedom, they were mine at last. Still, victory came with its own shadows. I couldn't ignore the years of scars he had left on me, nor the emptiness of standing in a place built on so much pain. The ranch was mine, but so was the burden of its history. As I walked the land in the days that followed, I felt both pride and sorrow battling within me. Ownership wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one I would have to write carefully, carrying both the wounds and the strength of everything that had come before. Yet deep down, I knew this truth. The man who had underestimated me for years had finally been forced to face what he never wanted to admit. I had survived him. I had endured every test, every humiliation, and every chain he forged, and still, I stood. The ranch was in my hands not because of his generosity, but because I had been strong enough to claim it. And as I looked out across the wide open fields, I whispered to myself, "This is mine. At last, this is mine." When I think back on the years I spent under my uncle's shadow, it feels like remembering a storm that never seemed to end. The thunder of his voice, the lightning strikes of his anger, the endless rain of work and exhaustion, it consumed my childhood, my youth, and so much of the woman I might have become sooner. But storms, no matter how violent, eventually pass. And when the skies finally cleared, I discovered something I had never expected: strength, resilience, and a future that belonged entirely to me. Owning the ranch was not the victory I once imagined. It didn't erase the scars or undo the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I would ever be free. What it gave me was something different: responsibility. For the land, for the workers, for myself. Every acre is a reminder of what I endured, but also of what I built with my own hands. The soil holds my sweat, the barns echo with my labor, and the fields stretch wide like the open arms of freedom. I no longer see it as my uncle's empire. I see it as my legacy. I won't pretend the transition was easy. Standing on my own meant confronting not only the debts he left behind, but also the doubts that lived within me. For so long, I believed I was small, insignificant, and powerless because that's what he wanted me to believe. It took losing him, his authority, his grasp over me, for me to finally realize that I had been strong all along. The ranch didn't define me. I defined it. And now, every decision I make shapes the kind of place it will become. People sometimes ask me if I forgive him. The truth is complicated. Forgiveness doesn't come easily when years of your life were stolen, when love was replaced with control and family with manipulation. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing someone else. It's about freeing yourself from carrying their sins on your back. So while I may never forget, and perhaps never fully forgive, I no longer allow his actions to chain me. He no longer owns my story. I do. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that survival is not the same as living. I survived my uncle's reign, but I didn't truly live until the day I realized I had the power to choose my own path. And that's the message I want to leave with you. No matter who underestimates you, no matter how tightly someone tries to control your life, there is always a moment when the balance shifts. It may take years, it may take everything you have, but when that moment comes, you will know you were stronger than they ever imagined. Now, as I stand on the porch of the ranch I once thought would be my prison, I see it differently. It's not a cage anymore. It's a canvas, a place where I can plant new roots, build new traditions, and honor the life I fought to reclaim. The ranch is no longer his story. It's mine. And I will spend the rest of my days writing it with pride, with love, and with the unshakable strength I earned through survival. If my story touched you, if it made you reflect on your own battles and victories, I invite you to stay with me here. Subscribe to this channel, because this isn't the end of my journey. It's only the beginning. There are more stories to share, more truths to uncover, and more strength to be found together. And who knows? The next twist may surprise us both.